Three.
Okay, we're getting started a little late, but that's okay. It is 6:33 on May 4th, and for my Chief of Staff, Tanya Love, I'm going to say May the 4th be with us all. But we're going to talk about a pretty serious and timely topic today, which is racial discourse, how it gets co-opted, and the topic of AAPI hate. And I have some guests on with me tonight to kind of talk about these subjects and their work in the community for cross racial solidarity and supporting the Asian community inside of our prisons, but also in the streets of Oakland, in our schools, and just all over the city. So um, it's a tough conversation, but it's a necessary conversation. They're starting to be had in lots of different places, but in a time where we're realizing that more and more people are becoming polarized from rhetoric, from just not being in relationship with each other. We need solidarity now more than ever. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight and what that actually means. Right now, the topic that we have in front of us, we're going to go ahead and bring up the slideshow if it's not up already. I will repeat, it is how racial discourse gets co opted and what is AAPI hate. Next slide. So, what is actually going on? What's going on in the community? We're seeing news stories, especially in the Bay Area, but nationally, about the antagonism that is growing amongst community members, specifically between marginalized communities. And one of the things that is constantly coming up in the news in Oakland and in the Bay Area is this concept of Black and Asian tensions, Black and Asian discord, and really the attacks on Asian, specifically Asian elders, by Black and Latino youth and Black and Latino people. And it's being perpetuated in the media as if that is the primary source of violence that is happening towards Asians. It's from Black and brown people, although the statistics tell a completely different story. This is not to downgrade or diminish what is actually happening, which is terrible. It is brutal and it is not acceptable by any means, anyone getting hurt. But what we continue to see is the stoking of division by certain media outlets. Um, the use of language to say that discrimination is happening to one group over another group. It creates and grows the existing tensions and seeks to capitalize on them. And so we're seeing this a lot on social media. It's completely unregulated, especially now on Twitter. But we're also seeing this in some legitimate news spaces in the mainstream press. Next slide. We're seeing this with elected officials of all races being called out for not addressing certain issues in the ways that people, and I want to say certain people who are intentionally stoking harm and stoking discord. If you don't say the right thing, or if you don't do the right thing according to these narratives or stereotypes, then people are framed as being anti. And so we're seeing elected officials. I'm seeing a lot of my Asian elected officials, specifically women, being called out for being racist or being race traitors, for promoting racial solidarity or other things. And then we're also seeing attacks on attempts to address historic harm. I've heard personally that the Black New Deal, which seeks to address the ways that Black West Oakland residents were disinvested in through urban renewal, as being a racist policy. We hear about in the national media that critical race theory is a racist policy. And so any attempt to address the historic harms that have been created through racialized imbalances and racist systems is being co opted or called racist by trying to address the actual and real lived experiences that existed in the past and continue to this day. And so you're also seeing attacks on affirmative action, voting rights, integration, busing, and even the reauthorization of the Civil Rights Act, all of those things are being classified as racist. Next slide. So, what this does by effectively utilizing these frames and these narratives in social media and in grassroots conservative movements, it allows the status quo to continue. And the status quo, the laws and the policies and processes that gave us what we are experiencing today, is what gets to remain in place if legislation and policies and practices are not put in place to diminish, to quite frankly smash white supremacy. If we are not able to do that through actions and just completely transforming the way that we do work, especially as policymakers and grassroots organizers, then the status quo remains in place. So we have to ask ourselves, who does it benefit to engage in this type of behavior? Who does it benefit to continue narratives of divisiveness? And who does it benefit for the status quo to remain in place? And one example of this is the attack on the Indian Child Wealth Act that prioritizes Indigenous families for rehousing Indigenous children before white families, but not harming children, which would end to the what lead to the end of tribal sovereignty. So it's happening in Ohio as well, where attacks on policies that are supposed to strengthen Indigenous families, strengthen Black families, are being labeled as racist and treated as if they're racist, and disallowing the self determination of individual races to build themselves up, to strengthen themselves. And it's one of the tactics that's being used effectively right now by the right. Next slide. So what is the history behind this? Next slide. In the 1990s, we started to see legal arguments about whether, as a country, institutions and individuals should be able to take conscious actions to address structural racism. And we started to see this more legally, but this has been a struggle that's been in place, quite frankly, since the inception of this capital-based, human wealth-based economy. And in early colonial America, the concept and practice of utilizing race to divide developed to undermine the racial solidarity that was happening with white indentured servants, native people to this continent, and Black indentured servants. Next slide. So initially, when the groups that I just mentioned were coming together to fight back against the oppression from colonizers, uh, the fear of what that power could be from all of these different oppressed groups coming together to oppose and overthrow the people that were suppressing them and utilizing, extracting their labor, there was a concrete and intentional move to separate the races. That is when laws were passed um, to take away the limited rights that indentured servants had, African indentured servants. And that is when the previously granted rights that they had, like the right to engage as a civic member of society, were taken away. Citizenship was taken away. The right to bear arms, all of those things were removed. And it also made interracial marriages forbidden. And that was the inception of chattel slavery in the way that America knows it today. Next slide. So the turning point was, as I stated, a condition where now heredity, being born in Black skin, became a badge of being a slave in the United States. A slave, a chattel slave in the United States. It was not like any other form of slavery in the world. So I want to be clear that there were many different types of slavery across the entire globe, but American chattel slavery was very, very specific, as was the systems of slavery in the Caribbean, in North America and South America. And after the American War of Independence, white indentured servitude was eliminated. So that condition where people were working and could work off their debt, that white Americans or white people coming to America or brought to America, Africans who were also brought to America and captured natives, that ended for white Americans. So you still had white Americans that were in poverty, but their condition of indentured servitude ended and chattel slavery continued. Next slide. So by the late 18th century, these intentional legislative uh, policies undermine the possibility of the solidarity that was happening throughout the different races. And being white became not just a badge of social and economic privilege, but a moral attitude. So the idea of whiteness became an idea of the individual's superiority. And that continues today. And being Black became synonymous with being a slave. Next slide. So, on that, what is racism? Well, what we're going to talk about, what racism is not. Racism is not liking someone or being angry with someone because of the color of their skin. That is a major misconception, and I'm surprised that it still exists to this day. That you not liking someone or having an issue or attitude or just being nasty to someone because of the color of their skin, yeah, that's really bad, and that is prejudice. But racism is a system of intentional structures where specific groups of people oppress other groups of people. It's a system of power. And legislation that targets historically marginalized communities and uplifts the conditions of working class and impoverished people, addresses the methods through which power exercises its will. Those are functions that power utilizes to continue or perpetuate itself. And we're going to have some more conversations about this because I'm speaking at a 50-foot high level right now, but I think it's really critical to differentiate the difference between prejudice and racism, power and systems. And so we can start to have the conversation about what does it mean to present power inside of systems and be able to perpetuate that generation after generation after generation. And that's part of the conversation that we're going to have because proximity to power also is a way that we are able to continue structured racism and the conditions that existed with the foundation of this nation. Next slide. So this is a quote that was brought up to me that I thought was really powerful. I learned about it earlier this week from my staff, and it says that before we can live in a post-racial world, we need to arrive at a post-racist one, and we arrive there by building solidarity with and amongst all historically marginalized communities. So one of the people that I'm going to bring on to talk about what solidarity looks like and what Asian hate looks like is my AAPI Heritage Month honoree for District 3. It's Mike Cheng of the Asian Prisoner Support Committee. I don't know if we have Tony here, but if so, we can bring them both on. Tony D is also the director of Youth Together. Do we have Tony? There he is. And so before we get into you all introducing who you are, I just have to say to whomever is watching right now, these two brothers are my brothers. We've known each other for over 2 decades now. And it is wild to see, you know, especially I just got to call you out, Tone, because when we met, some of the first work me and Tone did together, literally pulling human feces off the walls at EOYDC. And I just remember Tone was a kid at that point. And now to see Tone watching me and raise my kids and then having his own children is just surreal to me. And so that's on Tone. And then Mike also was there with the birth of my child. I remember the naming ceremony, just being a part of the cultural African traditions that my family holds, and having Mike there and be just a part of my life through the Black August Organizing Committee, so many struggles, and then recently at City Council, ready to just throw down every single time for whatever it is. These brothers are my family. And so I just wanted to introduce you all and just let you know how much I appreciate you all in my life and in my family's life, but also in our movement work, because you embody what solidarity is. So I want to open up the floor so you can introduce yourself. We're going to start with the elder. So we're going to start with Mike first, and then we'll go to Tony. And then we're going to get into the conversation.
Thank you, Carol. Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Cheng. I'm the Deputy Director of the Asian Prisoner Support Committee. We are based in Oakland, and we work on serving um, incarcerated Asians and Pacific Islanders. Both we have ethnic study programs that we facilitate in prisons. We run anti-deportation defense campaigns for those who are facing the threat of deportation. And we also have reentry services for people coming home. We have a contract with Alameda County, and we serve not just AAPIs, but anybody who needs help navigating life after they come home, particularly focusing on repairing relationships that sometimes could be strained with their family members due to, maybe burn bridges or just the stresses of having been incarcerated.
Thank you, Tone.
Word. Right on, Mike, and right on, Carol. My name is Tony Douangviseth, or AKA Tony D. I'm the executive director of You Together that works in Oakland high schools, really promoting multiracial solidarity since 1996. Our organization emerged because of a lot of racial tensions in schools, and through a collaborative community effort. We hosted mediations to really de-escalate something that the system couldn't really support at that time, and provided peace, unity, and justice at all of our schools. And so I also feel like being from Oakland, I got to state my credentials, went through OUSD schools, down with the OEA teachers, and making sure that all students and all kids in Oakland get a great education so then our communities can thrive. So I'll pass it back to you, Carol.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you both for the work that you do. I'm going to just take it back to one of the first campaigns, Mike, that you did, and you introduced us to what you were doing with Eddie Zhang. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about why it is important to do the work in prisons that you do, and to help folks that are returning home get reconnected. Because when we think of folks who are incarcerated, who need resources, folks don't typically think about AAPI folks. So, can you talk a little bit about why that work is so critical, and just some of our work at BAOC, because that's where we really got into some of the work around formerly incarcerated folks and currently incarcerated folks.
Absolutely. So Eddie Zhang, for people who don't know, he came to this country as an immigrant and was convicted for a participation in a robbery. He was given an indeterminate sentence. While he was inside, he became more politically aware through reading and correspondence with various folks, including Yuri Kochiyama, who's, an elder and ancestor of ours who, has mentored and inspired so many of us. At one point, Eddie decided that he wanted to seek, education about not just his own history as an Asian American, but the history of all people of color. So he, a brother named Mike No, and a brother named Rico Remedio petitioned to have Asian American studies and ethnic studies within San Quentin. The warden at the time did not like that, and as a result, threw the three of them into solitary confinement. So that was my first introduction to Eddie, when Yuri basically was gathering any supporters that she could to, petition, to, write letters of protest, to have demonstrations and teach-ins, to put pressure on the prison to eventually release them from solitary. That eventually happened. They eventually got shipped off to different prisons, and APSC, that first incarnation kind of was dormant. In 2005, a woman named Sun Lee contacted myself, Ben Wong, and Monica Lee, and she knew that we were all already working in different aspects, dealing with the prison industrial complex. And she noticed, like we did, that there seemed to be like ever-growing numbers of AAPIs behind the walls. Why prison was something that spoke to me and I think is important is because, it carries on the legacy of legal slavery that Carol just went through, right? The 13th Amendment clearly states that slavery shall be illegal except for those who are imprisoned. And, when you look at the conditions that create, the type of culture and atmosphere for people to fall in lifestyles that will get them locked up, it's always poor communities of color. It's always places that don't have access to equal education, like Tony was pointing out. And it just creates this funnel, right, from the school to prison pipeline. And for Asians, we were seeing a refugee to school to prison to deportation pipeline. I think in the 70s and 80s, most AAPI prisoners were mainly Chinese, Japanese, Korean. But since the 90s, it's been an explosion of primarily Southeast Asians, right? People from Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, who literally fled, war and genocide in their homeland, much of it sponsored from the US government. So they created, this condition that funnels them. And as they come here as refugees, they are dumped into poor communities that don't have resources, where the people are already struggling. And now they're just thrown in there with no culturally competent resources, guides, services, having to fend for themselves, and oftentimes feeling like they're in competition with the people who are already there. And so, this whole pipeline goes on, school isn't cutting it, and, they're going to prison. But now, even though they came here legally, many of them are permanent residents with green cards. When you're convicted of a felony, not only are you a legal slave, but for these people, they lose, their status as permanent residents, and they get deportation orders. So after they serve time, for some, people on our staff, there's people on our staff who've done 2 decades, right? 2+ decades. They come home, or they finally prove that they've been rehabilitated, no thanks to, a lot of what the prison offers, but mostly thanks to the efforts of outside community organizations who actually provide programs and services. They're found suitable for parole. And as they walk through the doors, there's an ICE van picking them up, detaining them, and in many cases, deporting them back to their homeland, their quote unquote homeland, where they may have came from, but there's no surviving family left. There's extreme prejudice against them because all people know is you must have done something bad to get sent back, and their lives are in danger. It's hard to make money. And, this impact, it impacts the AAPI community. And I'm not, of course, the overall picture, it's indisputable just by the numbers that Black and Brown communities are the most impacted, right? But one of the reasons why we don't have solid numbers for AAPIs is because, again, we get marginalized, and we aren't even classified or counted. CDCR classifies prisoners as either white and non-Hispanic, Black, or Hispanic, Latino, and other. So we don't even have data besides anecdotal data, and APSC has actually conducted several different surveys to the best of our ability. If anybody wants to see them, asianprisonersupport.org. You can see, the surveys that we've done and the data we've been able to collect off that. But really, that data should just be available, because that often masks what's going on and allows these narratives to go through where Asians are painted as being victims, and the solution being offered to them is police and prisons, when we see firsthand the effects that that's not actually the case.
Man, you just blew my mind with so many stats. I had no idea. I don't understand why that data wouldn't be collected. Is there any reason that the people are classified in the prison systems in that way? What would be the purpose? What's the rationale?
I don't know what the official rationale is. I think oftentimes prison politics, prison administrations, will claim that it's for safety, right? Segregating, the population by race and ethnicity to prevent conflict. But oftentimes when they do that, it actually encourages more conflict, right? And you're already in a hyper-masculine, hyper-violent environment, and now you're basically institutionalizing tribalism and preventing. And there are still understandings, there are still relationships that can develop, but by and large, institutionally, like, you're funneled into your group, right? And if conflicts arise and you're with your group, then you have to, stand with your group. And oftentimes, and we also know, Carol, in Black August Organizing Committee, a lot of the political prisoners that we worked with who were either politicized once they got inside or were imprisoned because of their political beliefs and actions. Oftentimes prisons would use other races to set them up and to try to retaliate against them.
Yep.
So we know that they do this and that it's not this benevolent idea of keeping people safer. Because if you are aware of the animosity, hostility, and just violence that it provokes, there's no way you could argue that it actually keeps them safer.
Right. And in fact, we've also found, and we know that oftentimes those conflicts are perpetuated by these same systems that are intended to guard or to keep safe and to you know, just the prison systems themselves and the guards themselves. We've heard countless stories about how conflicts are created and exacerbated by prison guards and wardens and other staff in those institutions. So um, I definitely appreciate the work that you're doing to make sure that people who have shown, as you said, to have been rehabilitated more so in part to external organizations have an organization to look to navigate once they come home, how to get reacclimated into society and to have the resources that they need in order to be successful. And so, just on that note, Tone, Mike talked about just people coming in, immigrating from other countries, from outside of the United States, coming to America and being moved into communities that are also under resourced. The public school systems are not funded in the way that they should be. We're experiencing a teacher strike right now that you talked about at the top of this live. What effect does that have on AAPI members of the community, Oakland residents, growing up as a so-called foreigner? Because a lot of times folks, even born and raised as Asian Americans in this country, are still seen as foreigners. How does that impact young people growing up and going through the public school systems and trying to navigate Oakland?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Carol. I could share a little bit of my experience. I'm actually the firstborn American born in my family, and my dad was the first of 14 children to come to this country from Laos in 1980. And when I was born in a tenderloin, and my mom was real young. And when I came, and after my mom and dad had split, and I came to the town, um, same thing, same situations. Like you see all different races, in your community, and you see all different types of cultures. But the one thing that we all have in common is that we broke. We live in a broke community, and we live in poverty. And I think as a kid, you don't really realize it. You don't realize it until you understand growing up. Like, dang, my black friends were going through the same things that I was going through. Like all of our parents were working parents, single parents, and just navigating school and public school as a child. Like I got to really experience like racism but just viewing it from like my friends, like majority of my friends were black at that time. And going to school with them, like they got sent to one class and I got sent to another class, right? And it was rare that we had like a mixed and integrated class. And so it was kind of daunting to me, and trying to figure out, like, question wise, why did they go to another class, and why weren't my friends in the hood like in the class with me? And so getting to see kind of like the treatment of black kids in elementary school really agitated me, and it made me angry. And it made me angry to the point where, growing up and playing sports, like, you know, there's a certain like perception, just because, like you said, of skin color, you grow like this prejudice. And I couldn't understand, like, from folks inside of my community and other communities, why there was this like anti-Blackness sentiment towards like folks that they didn't know, you know. And I just want to state for the record, like my dad working full time, trying to raise a son on his own, and like living in a time where a lot of, you know, my friends' older brothers were being locked up because they were like caught up in that type of lifestyle. They accepted me and then didn't show prejudice towards me, you know, and they accepted me for who it is that I was more than my own family at times, right? And because I grew up without a mother, the Black moms would step in and they would embrace me. And I never felt the hug until I got a hug from a Black mom. And just being accepted and like learning like proper etiquette. Like nobody taught me to say please and thank you. It was the Black mamas like, no, you're gonna say please and thank you. You know, you're gonna leave a message when you call. Just don't call and like hang up all of a sudden. And they taught me like how to really be like really proper etiquette with my situation, you know, or with who it is that I was as a human being trying to navigate the world on my own. And so growing up and then even, you know, doing the whole EOYDC thing, it's to really let people know that just because I may not have like a dark complexion skin, like we all go through common struggles, right? We all have like this history that's buried intentionally to keep us away from one another, from keeping us to acknowledge that, yo, you experience the same thing that I experienced, or your people experience the same thing that we experience, you know? Let's try to make this world better together, you know? Like, why do we always got to feel like broke people rob broke people all the time, you know? And so we don't have to do that. We could do it, you know, we could do it this way, and we could organize and we could mobilize and we could change systems so then everybody can benefit, right? So then we can actually learn from the past and not repeat the same things. But unfortunately, nowadays you kind of see the same things. So even in 2023, young people going to AP history class, still learning about Christopher Columbus, you know, still learning about like this white hero narrative. And, you know, like if we are agreeing to like a UC standard and UC system where the UCs actually acknowledge and approve ethnic studies, then why don't we do that with our K through 12 systems? Why don't we like talk about the experiences of our people head on, so then the young people get to make a conscious like decision on, okay, here's what the solution should be, right? So now we're problem solving around all of the different conditions that we're facing. But in today's education, you don't see that. So in your presentation, when we're scaling back and you see like things happening in Florida, you see things happening in Texas, you see things happening in Arizona, right? And them just like having this attack, like we in California, we in Oakland, we gotta stand up strong, and we gotta be able to really rally all of our folks across the country to say, no, it's time for us to be a part of those history. It's time for us to be acknowledged for our experience that we felt in our society, in this American society. So then the future can really figure out like, okay, let's be innovative and let's make some transformative change.
You know, who knew Tone was going to get up here and give a speech?
Only for you, Carol. Only for you.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So just on that note, and I'll take responses from both of you all in terms of building the society that we want to see and what cross-racial solidarity looks like. How do we get there and what actually is it? Because, you know, when we first start experiencing some of this, what I hope you all will talk a little bit about today, the AAPI hate phenomenon that was happening in the South and on the East Coast. When the first incident happened in Chinatown, I was like, that's not real. That is not Oakland. We don't do that here. And that's why it was a shock. But then later we found out it was not an Asian elder, it was a Latino elder. But by the time that it, you know, people found out the racial background of the individual that was punched in Chinatown, it had already spread all over the world that Asian elders were being attacked. And I think there were like 2 celebrities that put up reward money and started all of this, creating all of this attention on Oakland. And I was just like, we gotta get in front of this. And it seems like it has only exploded since then. So my question to both of you all is, what is solidarity? What does that look like in practice? And then how do we get there, especially understanding that the chasms that are existing between us are being exacerbated by the media and other folks who have an interest in keeping us divided.
I can start. To me, solidarity looks like a lot of what Tony was just saying, right? Understanding, our communities might have particulars to us, but the overarching challenges and histories, there's like way more in common, and especially in terms of the root causes. I'm seeing the comment somebody asked for some Asian history in the US, Robin Walker. Tony's organization, my organization, and shout out Nicole Lee and Urban Peace Movement. Our three orgs have collaborated on a project kind of addressing like this phenomenon that we're talking about. And you can go to any of our IG pages. I'll try to throw a link in the comment. And our first video was really addressing the history of systemic racism against Asians, right? And recognizing that the root cause of a lot of the impact of that does affect us, right? And being able to understand that, being able to understand that a lot of the freedoms that we have as AAPIs is on the shoulders of, the Black community in particular, who've been at the forefront pushing for freedom, justice, and equality. Understanding, there's a case, People v. Hall. If you haven't heard that, Robin Walker, it is a case, it was in the 1850s in California. A Chinese miner named Ling Sing was murdered, and the only 3 witnesses were 3 Chinese miners. So they testified against him. He was convicted. It goes to the California Supreme Court, and they overturned it because of a law that says no Black person can testify against a white person in court. And of course, the argument was, well, these 3 witnesses were not Black. And the California Supreme Court basically further clarified they weren't white, so they can't testify against white people, period. Understanding that impacts us helps us see things like the justice system. Like, if we don't push against it and fight it and watch it, like, it's not going to save us. I saw another comment about the inner dynamics between the Asian community, and yeah, like, our diaspora is like really, really spread out and diverse. Like, even I'm Chinese, and even like the experiences of Chinese Americans is going to vary like really wildly depending on where you grew up, your family's economic background. Southeast Asians I already addressed that. But I just want to say, in terms of what solidarity looks like, it is, understanding that we have way more in common, and like a lot of the root causes of our communities' pain, suffering, impacts us all. And, we all want safety, right? And it's not just Asian elders who need safety, right? Black and brown elders need safety too. All elders do. But until we recognize that, if we keep pushing for policies that only further demonize and criminalize our Black and brown relatives, then we're never really going to get anywhere. It's just going to maintain or perpetuate the same thing that also impacts AAPIs as well.
Right.
And I'll turn it over to Tony.
Yeah, I think the thing that comes up for me, Carol, is this idea of individualism, right? Individualism versus the common, and or a community. And when you say solidarity, I think about community. I think that we all live in this community, and we got to come to the table, and we got to struggle through hard conversations around what change we want, what kind of transformation we want to see, and how do we stand up not only for our own folks, but all folks. because it just ain't only like Asian people living in the Asian community, you know what I mean? Or specifically like Southeast Asian folks. And it ain't only like one type of group. So I think that solidarity is really gaining an understanding of like people's journeys to this country. How did they get here? And then what is it that they want to do? And how is it that we want to flourish and thrive as a community? Because like Mike had mentioned, we all want safety, right? We all want safety. We're all impacted by violence. You know, when something happens to a neighbor, it happens to all of us. And so I think that that approach, like we just can't, you know, in today's modern society, we just can't lock all of the boats in our home and thinking that we're safe, you know, just because we're barricading ourselves, because we're imprisoning ourselves, you know, to feel like that sense of safetyness. But that's not safety, you know, that's just an illusion. Like when you step outside of your house and you don't feel safe, that's an issue. But we should have a conversation and a dialogue around what is it going to take for all of us to be at the table, so then we have this common understanding and agreement on like, these are our values and this is what we're going to protect in our community, right? And so I think that when we stand in solidarity with folks, we're showing up, we're showing out, but then we're also pushing the needle for our communities to be a lot better than what it is right now. We don't have to say we're going to take this poverty, we're going to take this violence, and we're going to take X, Y, and Z in our community. Like, nah, let's work together, let's band together, and let's come up with a real solution for all people, just not for one type of people, but for all folks in our community here in Oakland.
I love that. I love that tone. And I think that's what one of the things that I would like to do in partnership with both of you, including Nicole Lee, is to take these conversations out into the community where we have our elders, our Black elders, our Latino elders, our Asian elders, and young people, because there's also a difference in belief across the spectrum of age and generation, and start having these conversations. Because I agree with Mike, like, the systems that exist were not designed to protect us and will not keep us safe. So understanding that, how can we come together in solidarity and have these conversations of what are we going to do to look out for each other and to love each other and care for each other and to keep each other safe? Because we've got to understand that the systems that we have right now are not doing it right. Folks are still getting hurt and getting harmed. So what do we do in between time? And I know, Mike, you've been a part of some work in Chinatown with some other folks, and doing just checks on folks, store owners, residents, to make sure that people are safe, just walking to and from their cars and things like that. And that's just a small example. But and I'm clearly at home, so I have people coming in and out the door. But what are some other things we can do? Would you all be down to have those conversations in community, like off Zoom, but like have translators there, have a bunch of different community members there to start having these neighborhood conversations?
Absolutely.
Okay, you're gonna bring all your people, Mike?
Yeah, you're my people, right?
Tone, you too?
I was gonna invite Mike. I'm like, Mike, come on, let's go to this meeting. But I think it's just more, and I extend the invitation, you know, to the babies and to the young people and to folks who are in their 20s and 30s and are trying to figure out, and they're like stuck in the middle of like, you know, things that they've grown up like falsely like learning and accepting, and finding themselves in the midst and in a place, in a difficult place in their life right now of like, how do I really address, you know, the situations that are happening at home that continue to perpetuate the anti-Blackness or the division that's happening in our community. So I extend the invitations to those individuals as well too, because we need all of us. Like, I'm really serious. Like, we need our folks who can really push the needle towards a common place of peace and unity, and then also justice as well too. So yeah, I'm down for it. But you know, I'm calling on all the guests right now to also mobilize your folks too. Knock on your neighbor's door you ain't never knocked on before. Hey, be like, we got a meeting. We got to go to this meeting real quick, you know? So for folks, you got to mobilize, you know? So I'm totally down, Carol.
That's what's up. That's what's up. And I think it's important to hit on what both of you all talked about too, which is a lot of the conditions that we're experiencing in our communities are through lack of resources. The teachers are striking right now. I saw on the news earlier this week how some of our schools have rat and mice infestations, and ceilings are leaking, and teachers are not being paid. But all the while, rents are rising, and they can't afford to live here. And a lot of our youth are homeless, trying to get an education, but can't even focus. They can't, they can't eat. And I've said this a million times, and I know folks are probably tired of the African proverb that I say all the time, but it says the child that is not embraced by the community will burn it down to feel its warmth. And so many of our kids are not embraced. And they put me on Fox News about this, and the world went ham that I said we need to nurture young people and from the time that they come into this world, in order to not have them turned and become bitter and angry and don't see the humanity in each other to create the pain in the first place. And that does not have a race. Right now in America, of course, Black folks who used to be property are taking people's property, because for so many years, and still it still continues to this day, that the most economically impacted and impoverished communities are the ones that are experiencing the most crime. So we can draw a direct parallel to lack of investment, lack of resources in poor communities to crime. And so until we decide as a society that we want to invest in the people who've been oppressed, then we're going to keep creating and perpetuating these systems that the prisons are not intended to solve. So like I said, they put me on national news, and that's when I start getting those death threats around Carol wants to nurture criminals. What I want to nurture is the children of the children of the children who were once property in this country, and our immigrant populations who are having to flee other countries to try to find better lives in America, because in their home countries they have also been extracted from with natural resources and human resources and potential, and they come here trying to find a better life, and often end up in the communities and in the conditions with all of us together who are also impoverished. And there's just this cycle. So my point is, we need the resources to invest in our babies, in our communities, so we can start to build the society that we all deserve, where everybody is safe. That's the only way that we're going to be able to create real safety, is by understanding that everyone deserves it, and we're going to pay for it on the front end, so we're not having to pay for it on the back end. And I do want to be able to give you all a couple minutes to say additional comments, and then we're going to see if the people who are listening at home want to make any comments or ask us any questions. So Mike, Tone, I guess, should I call you Tony now?
Look, Tony D. If you can say my last name, I give you so much love and so much belief. Growing up in our society, people was like, "How you say your last name?" And I was just like, "I'm only 5. I still don't know how to say my last name." You know? But being a proud Laotian and Chinese mix, one of the things that I learned in my organization that sticks to me to this very day is that no child that is born into this world are born bad. You know what I mean? They're not born violent. And if anything, they're born innocent. But the society that our power structures create those individuals and create and turn our babies to become something that nobody wants to become. You know what I mean? And so that's something that we really have to understand, is that no baby in our world, anybody who's listening that has a child, has ever been born bad and violent in our society. So there's always this opportunity to really change the discourse that we're on, So that's kind of like the last piece that I really want to say to the viewers and to our community. Mike?
I mean, there's so much that's already been said that I 100%, support and agree with. I think another piece of solidarity that's important to me, and I think should be important to folks interested in building it, is being able to also confront our own relatives who don't have it, right? Like struggle with them, work with them, try to, come to that understanding through communication, through these community, roundtables that hopefully we can do. But there's also going to be people who have whatever interests. Somebody in the comments I saw, was referencing, these federal grants that incentivize foreign investors to come in and swoop up property, right? And if that's not right, and if there's people in your community that aren't doing right, you also have to call that out. And you can't allow them to then represent you, right? And especially, for AAPIs, the news doesn't cover any of the struggles that we've discussed, but every time an elder is robbed, every time, I saw a reporter tag Stop Asian Hate, a reporter tag Stop Asian Hate because some Asian got their catalytic converter stolen, right? And pushing this narrative, like we also have a responsibility, and this reporter was Asian, and we have a responsibility to check that person and let them know you are not going to misrepresent us, and you are not going to cheapen and distort our pain to fit this sensationalized narrative that's only dividing us. So, I fully agree that, we need understanding, we need communication, we need to build, but the ones who don't want to build, they also need to get, they need to be addressed is what I'll say.
I feel you. I feel your spirit. Yes. And I think that goes both ways. I think right now we're just seeing it with AAPI Hate, with family members in the Asian community that might need to be called in or called out for piling on and adding to the sensational nature that creates further division. But just I'll say I've experienced it on my end with my family members, not biological, but my Black family, especially when it comes to housing and when it comes to ownership of real estate and being landlords. It was really easy for a group of Black elders who had Asian landlords to just make blanket statements about Asians because they had a bad experience with their particular landlord. And then when we would go to Sacramento to have not just lobby visits, but also to um, to testify for statewide legislation around renters' rights, it was often predominantly Asian in the chambers and Blacks and Latinos. The Asians tended to be landlords, and in these cases, the renters tended to be Black and Latino renters. And there was always this tension, and sometimes it would get really racialized. And I'm just like, we gotta be better than this, all of us, because these systems that were created that make people feel more privileged because they maybe have worked hard, or maybe they inherited property, are now in a position where they have some influence or impact on people's lives, but that is not the totality of who we are. And we got to figure these things out, because I'm just looking at some of the larger corporate owners of housing, like, yeah, this is great. This is what we need. We're going to use this minority group against these minority groups. And it just perpetuated tensions that I'm witnessing spill out even in local politics when it comes to housing work and housing policy. So I say that to say that, yes, we need to call in all of our folks, because I had to pull some folks aside. Like, you can if you talk about the issue, not about the individual, because they didn't call you out your name. There's no reason for you to be using slurs to talk about your disdain for your treatment as a renter. So it gets really sensitive, and we all have issues inside of our own race. There's anti-Black sentiment inside the Black community. There's colorism in the Black community, but there's colorism in every race. And it comes down to, how do we have these conversations with our own people so that we can work like outside of our individual groups to build a stronger just cross-cultural dynamic where we're building power for all of us. So I completely agree. And I probably know the reporter that you're talking about, Mike, if you saw it on Twitter, because folks in the Bay on Twitter like act up a lot. But once again, we didn't even touch on the role of the fourth estate, not really, in the media, and the role of the state in exacerbating the tensions between races, because the model minority myth came from the state. And so there's a lot that we didn't touch on. We are winding down on time, but I did want to give you both the opportunity to talk about the campaign that you're running right now on what AAPI hate actually is, because it is not stealing a catalytic converter. That is not AAPI hate. But I'm not going to say that. If you all could speak to that a little bit more, I would really, really appreciate it, and talk about the links and where we can find out more information on that as well.
So I think the project that we're working on, when it started to surface, I think that the narrative was really twisted to pit us against each other. And I think that for the viewership, for those news outlets, it's just horrible and it's disgusting. And to do that to a community and to do that for a people needs to get called out in the first place. And those folks within themselves also need to be educated around what is Asian hate. And so, you know, when Mike and I, and we had got together with Nicole, we were like, you know, we got to start with the basics. We got to start with the foundation, and we got to bring back this education that our young people deserve, that they don't get that they don't get to like really you know, dissect in the classroom, right? That they don't have these peer-to-peer conversations around how, you know, our experience in our society and even coming to America in the first place really put us in a tight position, not only for like years but hundreds of years as well too. And so yeah, I'll pass it on to Mike around like where they could find like what is Asian hate, and you know, share it with their folks, just as an ethnic studies 101.
Absolutely. So the names of our orgs again: Youth Together, that's Tony's organization; Urban Peace Movement, that's the organization Nicole Lee is the executive director of; and my organization, Asian Prisoners Support Committee. I believe somebody had thrown our tags in the comments, and I don't want to missay what the UPM or Youth Together ones are. And Carol's Facebook page just posted the video again, so thank you for posting that. You know, we really want to challenge this narrative that's pitting our community. Like, we're just tired of seeing our faces and our community's pain being used and exploited. And we want to build, you know, and model what solidarity looks like. You know what I mean? We want to challenge, you know, those who have vested interests in perpetuating it, you know, using, you know, disgracing, in my opinion, our communities by doing that, and, you know, blindly supporting the last administration in Oakland for whatever reason that they may have and whatever motivation. And we also, you know, like also need to address again, like not just from the elders, but also the youth, like the youth work that Tony's organization does, that Nicole's organization does, to embrace them so that they don't, you know, feed into the flames and burn it to feel warmth, like Carol said.
Ashe, Ashe. Well, we're going to take the last 2 minutes to take questions. I think there were a couple questions in the chat. Jyoti, if you could put them up, I would appreciate that, because I think folks do want to figure out how we have the solidarity work and how we put it into practice. I saw some from Leon, I think. How does the history of anti-communism affect the Asian community?
Woo! Tony?
Oh. Well, I picked the toughest one.
No, go for it, Tony.
The history of anti-communism affect. Okay, yeah, Tony.
Look, I think that's a multi-layer question. I'm just gonna call that out real quick. I think that Asian folks who are refugees that fled in the late 70s and early 80s because of the spread of communism we're fleeing war, and in a very violent war. You know what I mean? So when we think about the devastation that happened in like Cambodia, in Laos, and like the worst bomb country in the world in history, I would want to flee too. You know, I'm trying to get to survival. I'm trying to make sure that we got a future going on, and I think that communism gets put into, why folks feel a certain way. But I think that, my question for folks is like, people go and visit China, people go and visit Vietnam, people go and visit Laos and Cambodia, as tourists. And there's power structures in every place. And I think that with the anti-communism, it's really just folks' experience of war and trying to seek refuge in a safe place. I think that as it comes to like practice and theory here in America, it reminds people of violence. It reminds people of their family members getting killed, and so I'll just leave it like that. And so I'm looking at Mike right now. Mike.
Yeah, no, I mean, everything Tony said is real, and I also think it gets manipulated and exploited, right? Like I mean, all the trauma that Tony just described, people don't, a lot of our community struggles with it, right? Like, and this isn't even like generations removed. This is like our parents and even, some people who've witnessed it firsthand. And so, especially, we've been talking about the media, and there's like a rise of unchecked, unfact checked, like social media too, right? And we have a lot of right wing, Asian news, like supposedly Asian news, like, accounts, on WhatsApp, on Instagram, all over. And they just are always pushing that. And, for people who are heavily traumatized and their understanding of the source of that comes from communism, they're going to naturally just be like, no, we don't want that. Right. And so that is something we do have to be aware of, and we have to work through and help people understand that, that's not what we're trying to do. You know what I mean? And people who try to place that label on us, question that. And I would ask folks to actually look at what we said today. Everything that we spoke on, like none of that is communist, right? But there will be people who try to twist it, who try to paint it as such. And, that's just another trigger for folks that we have to be mindful of. Just like we can't just yell Asian hate no matter, anytime anything happens to an Asian person, it's not Asian hate. Just because somebody wants to talk about challenging the status quo and actually fighting for real freedom, justice, and equality, that does not equate to communism.
I think I'm glad that was raised, because I do have a lot of supporters, Asian elder supporters. And I remember one who owned, several properties, and one who owned several businesses. They told me, I love everything about what you are, who you stand with, what you stand for, but please don't let them make you communist. And I was like, what? It's like, don't. There's whispers. People are trying to say that you're a communist, and the people that I left my country from would just be really, really upset if you turned into a communist. And I'm like, okay, I hear you, but there's a lot of education that needs to go into our communities, because Tone, I think you put it well, when what people are responding to is the trauma from war and the trauma from living certain experiences. But the trauma that they're living in this country, they don't label that as capitalist trauma, right? So there's this double standard. So I think that the education is necessary. I'm going to end, not because I want to, because we have a lot more conversation to have, and we will be taking this conversation on the road, but it will be a solutions oriented conversation about how we are going to work together, and how we're going to start to not only just mend some of the divide, but also how we're going to build on the successes and the history of solidarity that we have. And I think that's really, really important for me. So one of the questions was, what events can we do in person or Zoom that could educate Asian and Blacks on our shared history? That is the beauty that I want to build in community with you all with, and with the people who are a part of this call today, and the folks who are watching on Twitter, Zoom, Facebook, Instagram, wherever. Those are the conversations we're going to have in community. I don't have dates right now because we're going to work that out with the organizations that are represented here today and with you all. So just be on the lookout. I'll put it on social media. I'm going to get together with my brothers here and then my sister Nicole, and we're going to figure out what that looks like. But we're definitely going to start having those conversations about that education piece, that solidarity piece, and that building power for our people piece, because that's what this is really about. And without anything, I want to leave you all with the last word. My last words to you all are that I love you. I'm so grateful for you. I'm happy that we're in the struggle together. And I'm going to leave you all with the last couple words.
My last couple of words is I will forever do this for the rest of my life to ensure that, my kids don't have to experience the same type of situations that we're currently going through right now. And I hope that the viewers and I hope that other folks can find it in their heart to open the door for other people to learn about who you are and your folks, and being able to share out like our cultural differences, but also come up with mutual understandings of what we need as one community. And so, yeah, that's my last words. I love you, Oakland.
My last words are just, this is just the beginning, right? This is the end of the conversation and the beginning of, what we hope can actually build towards everything we're talking about, right? Like, we can talk so much and we have to continue the conversations, but we also have to put in the work. We love you, Carol. Thank you for having us. Thank you for always supporting, all people, right? It was discussed, the attacks against you, especially accusing you of being racist. I just have to keep saying it because it's just so far from reality and the truth. It's absolutely, anytime anybody ever has anything to say about that, they can talk to me. And I also want to thank everybody in the comments. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if it was going to be a bunch of trolls. Internet comments these days can be really toxic. It's probably a testament to Carol and the base that you're building, that it was really insightful, thoughtful questions and comments. So have a good night, everybody. Go Warriors.
Go Warriors. Thank you. Love y'all. Love you, Oakland. Love you, Mike. Love you, Tone. And we'll talk to y'all soon, community.